My own daughter threw me out of my house, screaming, "My husband's family is going to live here now, so get out." I asked her, "And where am I supposed to go?" With a coldness that froze my blood, she replied, "Go live in a dumpster for all I care." So I left, but with a smile on my face, because I knew this wasn't a retreat, but a strategic withdrawal to set my plan in motion. In less than a week, they would lose everything: the house, the money, and their happiness. The phone shrieked just as I finished washing the lunch dishes. The shrill sound shattered the afternoon silence of my empty house, making me jump. Even with wet hands, I walked over and saw Charlotte's name on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't called me in 2 months. "Dad?" Her voice sounded different, sweeter than usual. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Charlotte, honey," I couldn't hide my excitement. "You never interrupt. It's so good to hear your voice." She laughed, but there was something forced about it, something rehearsed. "I have a surprise for you. We're coming to see you tonight, Michael, his parents, and me. We need to talk to you." I set the dish towel aside. My engineer's mind kicked into gear, automatically running calculations. "Tonight? That's wonderful. I haven't seen you all in so long. Should I make dinner? I could pick up that Pinot Noir you love from that little vineyard we visited in the Willamette Valley." "Don't worry about food, Dad." Her tone became firmer. "Just be ready for us at 7. It's important." Something in her voice gave me pause, but my loneliness was stronger than my caution. "Of course, honey. I'll make sure everything is perfect. Will you be staying the night? I can get the guest rooms ready." "We'll see how the night goes." She cut me off gently. "I have to run, but we'll see you at 7. The call ended before I could ask any more questions. I stood there holding the phone, replaying her words. A surprise, a conversation. It sounded too formal. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to close the distance that had grown between us since her mother died. Perhaps the reconciliation I had longed for was finally here. I glanced at my watch. 2:45 in the afternoon. I had just over 4 hours to get everything ready. Suddenly, the house felt full of possibilities. I walked through each room with fresh eyes, imagining how Charlotte would see them. The living room needed vacuuming. The bathroom needed fresh towels. I moved with the systematic precision that had defined my 40-year career as an engineer. First, I drove to the supermarket on Hawthorne Boulevard. The March air was crisp, hinting at spring but still holding the sharp edge of winter. I chose a bouquet of yellow daffodils, her favorite flowers since she was a little girl, and the bottle of Pinot Noir I'd mentioned. At the bakery, I found the individual chocolate tarts she always begged for on our weekend trips to Powell's Books. Back home, I arranged the flowers in my wife's crystal vase, which Charlotte had always admired. The afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window made them glow like little suns. I set the dining room table with the good china, the set we reserved for special occasions that had become increasingly rare. While tidying up the spare room, I found myself looking at old photo albums, thinking we could look through them together. Charlotte at 5, with a gap-toothed grin in her yellow sundress. Charlotte at 16, rolling her eyes at my camera but smiling anyway. Charlotte on her wedding day, radiant in white silk. I paused on that last image. Michael stood beside her in his rented tux, but his smile had always seemed hollow to me. His parents, Robert with his practiced businessman's grin, and Margaret with her perpetual look of disapproval, stood beside them. They had never fully accepted me, the simple, self-made engineer. But tonight would be different. Tonight, we would be a family. I showered and put on my best casual shirt, the blue one Charlotte said brought out the color of my eyes. In the mirror, I saw a man trying to look younger than his 62 years. Hope lit up my face. My graying hair was neatly combed, my expression optimistic. At 6:30, I did one last check. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh flowers. The wine was resting on the counter. The chocolate tarts waited on porcelain plates. Everything was ready for my daughter's surprise. I settled into my favorite armchair by the window, watching the streetlights on Maple Street flicker to life. The anticipation felt like Christmas morning, that delicious tension of waiting for something wonderful to happen. Outside, the sky darkened. A few minutes before 7, I heard car doors slam. I took one last glance in the hallway mirror, smoothing my hair. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see 4 silhouettes approaching. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the door before they could ring, a welcoming smile on my face. Charlotte, Michael. Charlotte stood on the threshold, wearing a black coat that made her look as if she were in mourning. Her face was serious, distant, no smile, no hug. "Hello, Dad." Her voice had lost all the warmth from the phone call. Michael, reeking of alcohol, pushed past her. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched aggressively. Behind them, Robert and Margaret Miller stood like sentinels, wrapped in their expensive coats. Come in, I said, my smile faltering. I was just about to open that wine you like so much. "We won't be staying for dinner," Margaret interrupted, striding in without an invitation and scanning everything with a critical eye. She flicked my wife's crystal vase with a disdainful finger. "Cheap flowers." I blinked, confused. They're daffodils, Charlotte's favorite." "Dad, we need to talk." Charlotte finally looked at me, but her eyes were as cold as a January rain. "Sit down." Robert pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my kitchen, my dining room. The mechanical click of the camera echoed in the tense silence. "What is he doing?" I asked, stunned. "Appraising the property," Margaret replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She sat in my wife's favorite armchair, as if she owned it. "My son's family will be living here now, so get out," she said sharply. The words hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the back of the sofa for support. "What? No, I don't understand. Where am I supposed to go? This is my house. I've lived here for 30 years. Charlotte's voice was like ice. "Go live in a dumpster if you want. We need this house." Michael took a step toward me, his breath thick with whiskey. "We've already cleared everything with the police. Don't make a scene." I stared at my daughter, searching her face for any trace of the girl I raised, of the woman I loved unconditionally. There was nothing. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, or worse, an inconvenience. "Charlotte, honey, I don't understand what's happening. Is this about money? If you need help..." "You're leaving tonight," Margaret cut in, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We'll give you an hour to pack your essentials." My legs gave out and I sank onto the sofa. My mind was reeling. On the dining table, the chocolate tart sat untouched. The wine breathed uselessly in its decanter. Everything I had prepared with such love now seemed to mock me. "This is my house," I whispered. Robert Miller finished his photo tour and pocketed his phone. "Not anymore. Charlotte is our daughter-in-law, and family takes care of family." The irony was suffocating. I looked around the room at 4 decades of memories. The life I built with my late wife, the home where I raised Charlotte with so much love. And now they were here, invaders in my living room, carving up my life. I looked at my daughter's face one last time. The same woman who had called me just 6 hours before, who had spoken of a surprise and made me believe, just for an afternoon, that I still mattered. Something settled in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something far more dangerous, calculation. "All right," I said, my voice low. The silence grew heavy. They were expecting tears, begging, despair. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Michael's aggressive stance faltered. I stood up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out my old leather suitcase. "I'll go pack some things." The tension in the room stretched like a wire about to snap. They were waiting for me to break, to plead, to rage. Instead, I walked to my bedroom with the methodical precision that had guided me for 40 years as an engineer. I pulled my worn suitcase from the closet shelf. The leather was cracked, but the latches still worked perfectly. Everything in its place, every element with a purpose. "All right, I'll go." My voice, surprisingly, was calm and measured. "But remember something. I've been an engineer my whole life. I know how to build things." I folded my best shirts with mechanical precision, and I also know how to tear them down. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. What's that supposed to mean? I looked up for the first time since they'd arrived and met her gaze directly. Nothing, honey. I just want you to be happy in your new home. From the living room, Margaret's voice rose, sharp and triumphant. He's finally seeing reason. I kept packing. I gathered my bank statements, insurance policies, and the deed to the house, though I wasn't sure what good it would do me now. Alongside them, I packed my engineering certificates and professional references, 40 years of impeccable documentation. Charlotte stood in the doorway, watching me. Maybe in some small corner of her conscience, she felt a pang of guilt. But when Michael called her from the kitchen, she turned and walked away. I saved the photograph of Ellen for last, taken at our anniversary dinner 3 years ago. Her smile radiated a warmth that felt impossible in this cold house, now filled with strangers who shared my blood. 20 minutes. That's all it took to pack up my life. I walked through the living room with my suitcase. My family, or rather, my ex-family, watched me like vultures circling a dying animal. Robert was taking more pictures, now focusing on the valuable pieces. Margaret had already settled into Ellen's armchair, rearranging the cushions to her liking. The utility bills are in my name, I said quietly. You'll have to change them. We'll handle it, Robert replied without looking up from his phone. I paused at the door and looked at the faces of those I had once loved, supported, and sacrificed for. Charlotte refused to meet my eyes. Michael, unsteady on his feet, was pouring himself a glass of the wine I had opened for our celebration. Margaret was studying my wife's crystal collection with a calculating gaze. Well, I said, tightening my grip on the suitcase handle, I guess this is goodbye. No one answered. The night air hit my face with a biting cold. The Portland March still held the last breath of winter, but the chill seemed to clear my head. I put the suitcase in the trunk of my Honda, the car Ellen and I had bought together 5 years ago. Still reliable, still serving its purpose. I drove through the familiar neighborhoods that, suddenly, no longer felt like mine. I passed the elementary school where I'd dropped Charlotte off countless mornings, the park where we'd celebrated her graduation, the supermarket where I'd bought the ingredients for the dinner that now sat forgotten. The fluorescent lights of a 24-hour convenience store glowed in the darkness. I pulled into the parking lot, walked inside, and used the ATM. I checked my account balances, my pension, my Social Security, decades of careful saving. I wasn't a millionaire, but I had more than they could ever imagine. I found an affordable but clean motel on a commercial strip about 15 minutes from my old neighborhood. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, checked me in without any questions. I paid cash for 3 nights. Room 237. The room smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and was furnished with just enough to survive: a single bed, a small desk, a TV, and a bathroom with thin towels and tiny bars of soap. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. It was time to solve a problem. The morning light filtering through the thin motel curtains was harsh and unfamiliar. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then, the memory of the betrayal hit me like a bucket of ice water. I powered on my laptop and logged into my online banking. The numbers on the screen were stable. Pension, Social Security, decades of savings. It was enough for what I needed to do. Next, I accessed the joint account I had opened with Charlotte when she was 16, her first real bank account. My name was still listed as a co-owner. She had probably forgotten all about it. Seeing the balance brought the first smile to my face in 24 hours. 30 years, working day in and day out, I murmured to the empty room. Time to take back what's mine. I closed the laptop and took a shower in the cramped motel bathroom. The hot water felt like pure clarity. No more confusion, no more hurt, just the precision of an engineer applied to a very specific problem. By 9:30 a.m., I was walking through the fluorescent-lit aisles of a Best Buy. The young sales clerk, a kid with purple-dyed hair, barely looked up from his phone. "I need a prepaid phone," I told him. "Something basic. And a cheap laptop for travel." He led me to a wall of electronics, pointing out options with professional boredom. I chose a simple flip phone and a basic laptop. I paid for everything in cash, no cards, no digital trail linking back to Norman Ross. "Setting up a home office?" he asked, making small talk as he rang up the purchase. "Remote work," I replied. "Consulting." It was almost the truth. The real estate office was in a remodeled house on Division Street. Sarah Jenkins, according to her desk plaque, looked up from her computer with the bright smile of someone who lives on commission. "How can I help you today?" "I need a modest apartment, 1 bedroom, a month-to-month lease if possible," I said, sitting across from her. "I work online, so I need good internet." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Budget range?" I gave her a figure that made her smile widen. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me an attractive tenant. "I have several options. This place in the Hawthorne district has fiber optic internet, perfect for remote work." "When could I move in?" "Today, if possible." She blinked in surprise. "That's ambitious. I like ambitious." She picked up her phone. "Let me make some calls." 2 hours later, I was signing a lease for a clean 1-bedroom apartment just 12 blocks from my old house. Close enough to watch, far enough to avoid accidental encounters. Sarah handed me the keys with professional efficiency. "The internet should be active by tomorrow morning. Anything else I can help you with?" "Just where to find a good cup of coffee." She laughed and recommended 3 cafes within walking distance. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. The empty rooms echoed with possibilities. I left my suitcase in the bedroom and set up my new laptop on the kitchen counter. The afternoon sun streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like little ideas taking shape. I powered on the laptop and started making lists, available resources, necessary timelines, information to be gathered, Phase 1 objectives. Outside, Portland hummed with the routine of ordinary lives. Inside, I was beginning to build something extraordinary, something they would never see coming. I took out my old phone and looked up the data I had on Charlotte, Michael, and the Millers. So much information, so many vulnerabilities. I started connecting the dots. Wednesday morning, I approached the task with the same methodical precision I always applied to my engineering projects. My apartment had become an operations center. 4 manila folders were perfectly aligned on the kitchen table, each labeled with a name: Charlotte, Michael, Robert, Margaret. I opened the new laptop and started documenting what I already knew: Charlotte's work address, her favorite lunch spots, her predictable routines, the construction company where Michael worked, the address of the Millers, which was now my old address. But these were just outlines. I needed details, weak points, pressure points. On Thursday night, I found myself sipping a ginger ale at the bar of the River's Edge Casino. The bartender, a talkative woman named Linda, kept the conversation flowing as smoothly as the drink she poured. "That Michael fellow comes in here a lot," I commented, nodding toward the blackjack tables where my son-in-law was hunched over his cards. "Oh yeah," Linda followed my gaze. "He's been losing big the last few weeks. Keeps saying he'll pay up when he sells some house." I took a sip of my drink, watching Michael's desperate gestures as his chips vanished. "He seems pretty confident about that sale." "He'd better be for his own sake," Linda lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Some of the guys he borrows from around here don't like to wait, if you know what I mean." Michael eventually stumbled away from the table, his face flushed with alcohol and frustration. I snapped photos of him from a distance with the zoom lens of my new camera, clear images of his condition, his behavior, his company. Evidence. On Friday morning, I followed him to his job downtown. Henderson Development, a mid-sized firm with offices in a glass tower on 3rd Avenue. At 11:30, he left for what was clearly going to be a long lunch. He wasn't alone. The woman with him, a redhead in her 30s, wore a tailored suit that looked far more expensive than Michael's salary could afford. They walked close, his hand on the small of her back in a way that was far too intimate for colleagues. I took pictures from across the street, their body language, her hand on his arm, the quick kiss he gave her before she got into her car. More evidence. That afternoon, I went to the Multnomah County Records Office. The public records revealed with cold precision the extent of Robert Miller's financial disaster. A failed restaurant chain investment, over $43,000 in back taxes, and a business license suspended for non-payment. The Millers weren't just desperate. They were drowning. Back in my apartment that night, I spread the photos and documents across the kitchen table. Michael's gambling debts and his affair, Robert's tax problems and suspended license, Margaret's complete dependence on her husband's already committed income. Each folder now contained enough ammunition to completely destroy its target. I leaned back in my chair, studying the evidence with the satisfaction of an engineer who has identified all the structural weak points in a faulty design. The foundations of their victory were riddled with cracks. My old phone buzzed. It was time to begin the demolition. On Saturday morning, my mind worked with the methodical clarity of a structural engineering problem. I laid out the files on the table again, this time to plan the sequence of actions. Charlotte first. Financial pressure would create immediate panic. Robert second. A government investigation would drain his scarce resources. Michael third. His debts and his affair gave me multiple points of attack. And Margaret last. Her absolute dependence would ensure she fell when the others collapsed. At 10:30 a.m., I was sitting across from David Chen, the branch manager at First National Bank, the same one where Charlotte and I had opened her first account 18 years ago. I need to modify the access permissions on this joint account, I told him, sliding the documentation across the desk. David reviewed the papers with professional efficiency. These changes will be effective immediately, Mr. Ross. You will remain the primary owner, and your approval will be required for any significant withdrawals. Perfect. And please notify me of any access attempts. Can you set a specific limit for the co-owner? Yes, a maximum of $200 per day. Anything more will require your written approval. Charlotte would discover the restrictions the next time she tried to pay rent or buy groceries. The panic would be immediate and total. After lunch, I met with a lawyer, James Parker. His diplomas covered an entire wall like trophies, which I found reassuring. I've invested $23,000 in improvements to that house over the last 5 years, I explained, showing him the meticulously kept receipts. New roof, foundation reinforcement, kitchen remodel, it's all documented. James reviewed the papers with a thoroughness that justified his hourly rate. You have a legal claim to this house, Mr. Ross. You've invested a significant amount in both its purchase and upkeep. Excellent. But first, I want them to realize their mistake. He looked up from the documents, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. What do you mean? They took my house because they thought I was helpless. I'd prefer they discover for themselves how wrong they were before I take legal action. An interesting approach, but your legal position is solid whenever you choose to act. Perfect. I'll be in touch when the time is right. My last stop was the Oregon Department of Revenue building on Commercial Street. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with a tired expression, took my envelope without much interest. Anonymous tip regarding potential tax irregularities, I stated. Yes, Robert Miller, businessman, I confirmed, handing over the documentation of undeclared income, questionable deductions, and his suspended business licenses. She sealed the envelope and placed it in a tray marked for investigation. Government bureaucracy would handle the rest with its own methodical precision. Back in my apartment at 5 p.m. sharp, I poured myself a glass of wine. The occasion deserved a toast. Outside, the lights of Portland began to twinkle on, like small promises of what was to come. The first moves had been made. Charlotte would hit the wall on her account within days. Robert's tax investigation would begin in a matter of weeks. Michael's gambling debts would continue to compound. I opened my laptop and began to outline the next phase. Monday morning arrived with the punctuality I'd planned. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Someone had tried to access the restricted account, several times in fact. The timestamp was 10:47 a.m. Charlotte had just discovered her new reality. I poured a cup of coffee and opened my online banking portal. The activity log showed 7 failed access attempts in 15 minutes, 2 calls to customer service, and an urgent review request. All denied, just as I had planned. The phone rang at 11:23. It was Charlotte. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message with the satisfaction of an engineer watching a perfectly calibrated machine at work. Dad, it's Charlotte. There's a problem with our account. The bank says you've restricted access. Please, call me back immediately. This has to be a mistake. The second call came at 11:41, her voice more desperate. Dad, where are you? I can't pay the rent. I can't buy food. My card was declined at the coffee shop in front of all my coworkers. Please, whatever is happening, we need to fix this now. I was making lunch when the third call came. Her voice cracked on the single word she left. Help. That afternoon, she apparently called Michael. My listening device, a simple bug I'd placed near their bedroom window during a reconnaissance visit, picked up fragments of their conversation. Dad's money is locked up. Charlotte's voice was sharp with real panic. How are we going to pay the mortgage? Michael's reply was slurred with afternoon drinking. Relax, honey. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can sell some things from the house. This can't be a coincidence. The bank said the account holder restricted access. That means Dad did this on purpose. You think your dad? No, he wouldn't know how to do something like that. I smiled. Michael's underestimation of me would be my greatest asset. The mail arrived at 3:30. Tucked between the bills and junk mail was an official envelope from the Oregon Department of Revenue, addressed to Robert Miller at his business address. The tax investigation, triggered by my anonymous tip, had begun. At 4:15, Charlotte's phone rang. I listened in as she paced around my old kitchen. Robert, it's Charlotte. We have a problem. Actually, several. Her voice was tired, the panic hardening into grim determination. The IRS wants to audit your business records, and Dad has locked us out of the bank account. Robert's reply was laced with disbelief. That's impossible. Your father doesn't have that kind of authority. The bank disagrees. They say he's the primary account holder and can restrict access whenever he wants. There was a long pause. Then, Robert's voice, much quieter. Where's your father now? I don't know. He's not answering his phone. His old neighbor said she hasn't seen him since he left. Another pause. Charlotte, what did we get ourselves into that night? I heard the old kitchen chair creak as she sank into it, Ellen's chair. I'm starting to think we severely underestimated him. Wednesday morning brought the meticulous precision of Phase 2. I laid out the compromising photos of Michael on the kitchen table like exhibits in a trial. 12 sharp images of my son-in-law with his red-headed colleague outside her apartment building, in his car, at a downtown restaurant during work hours. Beside them, I placed documentation of his gambling debts, casino receipts, and bartender testimonies, a pattern of financial irresponsibility stretching back months. 2 envelopes were ready to be mailed, one to Human Resources at Henderson Development and the other to Charlotte at her office. By 10 a.m., Michael's supervisor was reviewing an anonymous report about an employee's gambling problem and questionable use of company time. Photos of Michael drinking at lunch, documentation of his debts, witnesses stating he promised to pay up after selling the house. Henderson Development prided itself on reliability and family values. Michael had become a liability. At 11:30, my device picked up Michael's frantic call to Charlotte from the Henderson parking lot. "They fired me!" His voice was cracking. Just like that. Someone sent them information about my personal life. Charlotte's reply was clipped, the voice of someone at their breaking point. "What kind of information?" "Pictures of me at the casino, statements from people saying I owe them money. They said I'm a risk to the company's reputation." "Michael, we can barely buy food. How are we going to survive without your salary?" But that conversation was cut short when the mail arrived at Charlotte's office. 2 hours later, my device picked up a very different dialogue. "I know about your affair, Michael." Charlotte's voice had turned deadly cold. "I want everything. Half of whatever we have left." "Charlotte, please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. The pictures don't lie, Michael. You've been seeing someone else while I'm trying to hold this family together." "Honey, I was desperate. The gambling got out of hand and she was just, after what we did to my father and now this, you're just like them." Charlotte's voice was filled with contempt. A disappointment. The irony was not lost on me. My own daughter, comparing her cheating husband to the father she betrayed, completely unaware that the father was orchestrating her husband's downfall. Michael's voice turned pleading. "This can't be a coincidence. First, your dad locks the money. Then I lose my job. Now these photos show up. Someone is doing this to us. Who would go to so much trouble to destroy us?" The silence that followed was beautiful in its implication. Even through the listening device, I could sense the exact moment the realization began to dawn. "Your father," Michael finally whispered. "We kicked a man out of his house who spent 40 years learning how to methodically solve problems." Charlotte's laugh was humorless. "Dad couldn't organize a birthday party, let alone some elaborate revenge scheme. Then explain to me how our entire life fell apart in a single week." I closed my laptop and poured a glass of wine. Michael was broken, professionally and personally. Charlotte was facing financial ruin and marital collapse, and they were both beginning to suspect the true scope of their mistake. Tomorrow, Phase 3 would begin. Friday morning arrived with the predictability of engineering principles. I knew they would come for me today, desperate, coordinated, and convinced that intimidation could achieve what their planning had not. I arranged my legal documents in neat stacks on the kitchen table. Bank statements, property investment receipts, correspondence from my lawyer, all legitimate, all defensible. At 10:30, the knock came. Officer Davis stood on my doorstep with the tired expression of a man handling yet another domestic dispute. Behind him, in the patrol car, I could see Margaret Miller, her face hardened with the expectation of victory. "Mr. Ross, we've received a complaint against you." His tone was professional but skeptical. "The family says you've been threatening them and they want you to leave them alone." I opened the door wide and gestured to the perfectly ordered paperwork. "I haven't broken any laws, officer. I'm simply protecting my legal rights as an account holder and a property investor." Davis stepped inside and examined the bank correspondence, the letters from my lawyer, the investment receipts. His expression shifted from official concern to mild annoyance. "This all looks legitimate. What exactly are they accusing you of?" "Of restricting access to my own bank account, of consulting a lawyer about my real estate investments, of reporting potential tax irregularities to the proper authorities." I handed him James Parker's business card. "You can verify everything with my legal counsel." 20 minutes later, Officer Davis delivered his verdict to Margaret Miller. There was no evidence of criminal activity, no basis for a restraining order, no police protection for people facing the legitimate consequences of their own financial decisions. It ruined her morning. That afternoon, Margaret launched a one-woman social destruction campaign, going door to door in my old neighborhood. "That man is dangerous," I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson through my surveillance device. "He's threatening our family and trying to take our house." "Has he done anything illegal, Margaret?" Mrs. Patterson asked neutrally. "Well, no, but Then maybe you should talk to him directly instead of involving the whole neighborhood. The rest of her attempts met the same fate. Neighbors who had known me for decades were not about to be convinced that quiet Norman Ross had suddenly become a menace to society. By 3:00 p.m., Robert Miller had escalated to professional surveillance. Rick Stone, a private investigator, parked his unmarked sedan across from my building with all the subtlety of someone used to insurance fraud cases, not methodical revenge operations. I took his picture from my window, noting his license plate and the telephoto lens he was mounting. Amateur. I had anticipated professional investigators from the day I moved into this strategically located apartment. His presence actually simplified my next steps. Let him document my routine. Trips to the supermarket, the library, the coffee shops. Let him waste what little money Robert Miller had left on surveillance that would reveal absolutely nothing illegal. My phone buzzed with a text from James Parker. Family attempted to file a harassment complaint. It was dismissed for lack of evidence. All your activities remain within legal bounds. Perfect. They were panicking, just as I had calculated, and desperate enemies make predictable mistakes. The Miller family was proving that engineering principle flawlessly. Their coordinated counterattack had achieved nothing except to confirm that they completely misunderstood the situation. I wasn't an angry relative acting on emotional impulse. I was their systematic opponent, and Phase 3 was about to make that crystal clear. Saturday morning, I woke up with an unexpected weight in my chest. I sat up, surrounded by the evidence of my absolute victory. Bank statements proving Charlotte's lockdown, photos documenting Michael's professional ruin, tax investigation notices for Robert's crumbling empire. Everything I had planned had worked with engineering precision. So why did I feel so empty? As I was organizing the files, I came across a manila envelope I'd forgotten I'd packed. It was filled with letters from Ellen, written during a brief separation we'd had 40 years ago, when we argued over her mother's meddling in our marriage. I opened the first one, my hands remembering her handwriting better than my ears remembered the sound of her voice. "My dearest Norman," she wrote in her careful script, "anger makes us do things we later regret. I know you want to prove a point to my mother, but proving you're right won't make either of us happy." The words hit me harder than I expected. Ellen had always been able to see past my engineering solutions to the human problem underneath. Even when she was furious with me, she never lost sight of what was important. I read letter after letter, each one filled with her gentle wisdom about family conflict and forgiveness. In one, she wrote, "Norman, revenge never makes anyone happy, but justice is worth seeking. There's a difference between making them pay and doing what's right. Doing what's right." The phrase echoed in my head as I drove to Riverside Cemetery. Ellen's grave was under an old oak tree, a simple granite headstone summarizing 37 years of marriage. I hadn't been back since the funeral 6 months ago, but today I needed her guidance more than my own pride. "What would you do, honey?" I asked the headstone, feeling foolish but also desperate. "Would you forgive them, or would you fight for justice?" The wind rustled the leaves of the oak, and for a moment I thought I heard her answer. It wasn't anything supernatural, just memories so vivid they felt like a real conversation. "You've already won, Norman. They know they can't bully you. They know they underestimated you completely. But destroying them won't bring our house back, and it won't cure Charlotte's selfishness." I traced her name etched in the stone. "I've destroyed them completely, but it doesn't feel like a victory." My memory supplied her soft laugh. "Because you're not a destroyer, honey. You're a builder. You've spent 40 years solving problems by creating solutions, not by eliminating obstacles." The afternoon light filtered through the branches, warming the granite beneath my fingers. Ellen had always been right about these things. She had seen me more clearly than I saw myself, the difference between my engineer's mind and my father's heart. There's a difference between making them pay and doing what's right, I whispered, repeating her words from the letter. That night, back in my apartment, I laid out my legal documents on the kitchen table again. But this time, I wasn't planning another systematic demolition. I was designing a different kind of solution, one that would restore justice without requiring revenge. I turned on my laptop and began drafting a very different document, a letter to James Parker about taking legitimate legal action to reclaim my property. Phase 3 would still demonstrate the difference between them and me, but it would do it in a way that would have made Ellen proud. Monday morning arrived with the clarity Ellen's memory had given me. I organized my documentation into 3 neat piles: property investment records, financial evidence, and documentation of potential crimes, all legitimate, all systematic, all legal. At 9:30 a.m., I was sitting across from Detective Sarah Johnson at the Portland Police Bureau. She reviewed my materials with the professional thoroughness of someone who had seen too many family disputes turn criminal. "Mr. Ross, you have enough evidence here to press criminal charges," she said, studying Robert Miller's tax documents. "Financial fraud, tax evasion, and a potential conspiracy to defraud you of your property investment." I handed her the photos of Michael's gambling activities. "I want justice through legal channels, not personal revenge." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Most people in your situation would be out for blood. My wife taught me the difference between making people pay and doing what's right." Detective Johnson initiated the investigation immediately. By 11 a.m., arrest warrants were issued for Robert Miller for tax evasion. The methodical approach that had served my private campaign now served legitimate justice perfectly. An emergency court hearing was held at 1 o'clock. Judge Williams, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, reviewed my property investment documentation with professional efficiency. "Mr. Ross invested $23,000 in improvements to this residence over 5 years," James Parker explained to the court. "He has a legal right as a co-investor." The judge examined the receipts, contractor invoices, and bank statements. "The home is to be returned to its rightful owner. The defendants are ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours. The bang of the gavel sounded like an engineering solution clicking into place. At 3 p.m., the eviction notice was served. I watched from across the street as a deputy sheriff handed the official notice to Margaret Miller. Her face cycled through the same sequence of emotions I had seen 2 weeks earlier: shock, anger, desperate calculation. But this time, she wasn't facing an aggrieved engineer. She was facing the full weight of the law. Charlotte emerged from the house with a suitcase, moving mechanically, like someone in emotional shock. Michael followed, his eyes hollowed out, the look of a man who had lost everything because of his own choices. They loaded their car in silence. No arguments, no threats, no desperate attempts at manipulation. Just the quiet acceptance of people finally meeting a consequence they could not avoid. At 5 o'clock, I crossed the threshold of my home for the first time in 2 weeks. The place felt different, not because they had changed it, but because I had. The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window just as it had on that first day when Charlotte called with her surprise. But now it illuminated a justice reclaimed through the proper channels, not a revenge executed through methodical destruction. I picked up Ellen's crystal vase from the dining room table. It had survived their occupation intact, just as my sense of right and wrong had survived my brief descent into vengeance. Tomorrow, Charlotte would have to face her own choices and learn to rebuild a life without relying on money that was never truly hers. Tonight, I was home. Friday morning arrived with the quiet satisfaction of justice served. I stood on the threshold of my house legally restored to me, with a single suitcase and 30 years of reclaimed dignity. The locksmith had finished his work the previous afternoon. These were my keys now, legally and morally. The Millers had left evidence of their hasty departure. Takeout containers in the sink, magazines scattered on the coffee table, Charlotte's expensive face cream forgotten in the bathroom. They had treated my home like a temporary hotel, never understanding they were occupying someone else's life. I spent the morning systematically erasing their presence, not with anger, but with the methodical precision Ellen would have recognized. An engineer's approach to restoration: assess the damage, prioritize repairs, execute the solution. The afternoon brought new locks, a security system, and fresh flowers for Ellen's crystal vase. The house was beginning to remember who it belonged to. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Charlotte's number. "Dad?" Her voice was completely devoid of the arrogant confidence I'd heard 3 weeks ago. "Can we talk?" I thought about hanging up. Then I remembered Ellen's lesson about the difference between justice and cruelty. "We're talking." I was wrong. The words came out in a rush, like a confession torn from a deep wound. Everything is falling apart. Michael is drinking again. The Millers blame me for Robert's arrest. I lost my job because I can't focus on anything. I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte. Are you? The question was raw in its honesty. Was I sorry, or was I just satisfied that the consequences had arrived as planned? Yes, I was sorry. I was sorry it had come to this. Yes, I am. I'm sorry we're here. Dad, forgive me. Please, I know I hurt you, but I'm still your daughter. The silence between us stretched as long as the 18 days since she had last called me Dad. Charlotte, forgiveness is one thing. Trust is another. You made your choice when you threw me out of my own home. Now you have to live with it. I can't survive without my money. You've survived for 34 years by learning to depend on me for everything. Now, it's time you learn to depend on yourself. Dad, please. For 30 years, I gave you everything I had, my time, my money, my heart, my home. And the second it became convenient for you, you threw it all away. I paused, watching the afternoon light filter through the kitchen window. That taught me something valuable about what I was protecting. The line was silent except for the sound of her breathing. Goodbye, Charlotte. I hung up. That night I opened a bottle of good wine, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat in Ellen's favorite chair. The house felt different, not just because the Miller's presence had been erased, but because it now contained something new, a self-respect restored through legitimate channels. Ellen, I said aloud to the empty living room, I did it right. Justice prevailed. I could almost hear her soft laugh, feel her approval in the familiar creaks of our house settling around us. The systematic opponent had become something better, a man who had learned the difference between winning and being right. Outside, Portland went on with its life. Inside, I began to plan what to build next.